Well, hard to believe we're almost there. June 1st marks the start of the Atlantic hurricane season. But emergency managers say now is the time to prepare before a storm hits. According to a new study, North Carolinians may be falling behind when it comes to hurricane preparedness. WECT's Ava Brengord spoke to some of the experts behind this study. Ava, what's their reason for singling out North Carolina?
Well, Fran, it all comes down to a state law that stopped updates to the state's building codes. The study from the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety says people who are building a new home or making renovations, for example, may not have the newest technology to withstand a storm. As you get prepared for the next big storm, your home may not be as ready as you think. A new study by the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety Research Group says North Carolina is falling behind on hurricane preparedness. It centers on a state law passed last August that puts a moratorium on updating building codes through 2031. That means people building new homes or repairing older ones may not receive the newest technology or materials to withstand a storm.
That'll put them over 15 years behind on building code adoption if nothing changes.
Ian Jamanko managed the data for the study. He says the law could create unintended consequences for people living along the coast.
So when we look at new construction, the communities of the future, we're introducing sort of this unintended vulnerability by putting a halt to code adoption through such a long period of time.
Emergency management officials say there are things you can do now to make sure your home is ready for what the future might hold.
That's a simple walk around the yard. Look at your trees, your limbs, anything that could fall down with wind and rain.
He says having a contractor come out to evaluate your home can help ensure it's up to standard.
You know, again, with varying ages of construction in our community, you really have to have individualized, specific assessment of your home.
What's most important, having a plan, noting your possessions, and getting supplies early to save time and stress when a storm hits in the future. Now, you can always count on WECT for updates when a storm is approaching. Don't forget to download our weather app because being notified and prepared can make a big difference in how a storm impacts you. Ava Brengord, WECT News.